Henry VIII didn't just die. He rotted alive and took half the kingdom down with him. His legs were covered in open sores that never healed. The smell? So bad, people held their breath just walking past his room. His servants were terrified of him, and when he finally died, his body exploded in the coffin, literally blew up, right in the middle of his royal funeral. But that's just the ending. Before that, he changed religion to divorce his wives, killed friends on a whim, ate like 5 men every day, and trusted no one, not even his kids. This isn't the king you learned about in school. It's the one history tried to bury. And the worst part? The chaos didn't stop when he died. It got even weirder. Picture this: the most powerful man in England, sitting on his golden throne while his leg literally putrefies beneath layers of silk and velvet. Henry VIII didn't just die. He spent his final decade as a walking corpse, his body betraying him in the most grotesque ways imaginable while he still wielded absolute power over millions. The rot began around 1536, when a jousting accident left Henry with a wound that would never heal. What started as a simple leg injury became an ulcer that oozed, stank, and festered for the remaining 11 years of his life. Court physicians tried everything from ground pearls to unicorn horn. Yes, actual unicorn horn was prescribed, but nothing could stop the royal decay. The smell was so horrific that servants could detect the king's approach from 3 rooms away. Courtiers learned to breathe through their mouths during audiences, and Henry's own wives reportedly gagged when forced into close proximity. One Spanish ambassador wrote that the stench was more terrible than words can express. Of course, nobody dared tell the king he reeked like a medieval sewer. Instead, they burned expensive incense and pretended the sweetest fragrances in Europe were simply part of royal protocol. Imagine having to convince yourself that odor-rotting monarch was actually the latest court fashion. But the rotting leg was just the beginning of Henry's bizarre medical nightmare. Henry's physicians were essentially expensive executioners with medical degrees, and their treatments read like a medieval horror manual disguised as healthcare. When the king's ulcer refused to heal, they decided the obvious solution was to keep it artificially open, because surely a permanent wound was better than letting it close naturally. Dr. William Butts, Henry's chief physician, literally inserted gold tubes into the festering wound to prevent it from sealing. Every day, servants would drain the pus and blood, then reinsert the tubes to maintain what they called proper drainage. The procedure was agonizing, but Henry endured it for years because his doctors convinced him that closing the wound would cause the bad humors to poison his brain. The medical establishment of the 1540s, England believed that Henry's rotting leg was actually keeping him alive by allowing evil spirits to escape his body. They prescribed treatments that included drinking his own urine mixed with ground emeralds, applying fresh cow dung to the wound, and bleeding him regularly to balance his humors. Contemporary records show Henry consumed over 400 different medications during his final decade, including mercury, lead, and arsenic, substances we now know are deadly poisons. His doctors were literally killing him while claiming to heal him, and the king paid them handsomely for the privilege. At least they were consistent with their 5-star Yelp reviews. These weren't back-alley quacks. These were Cambridge-educated physicians who genuinely believed they were practicing cutting-edge medicine. The same men who could perform complex surgeries thought that bathing in milk mixed with virgins' tears would cure royal gout. The royal body was becoming a laboratory for medical malpractice, and Henry's deteriorating mind would soon make his physical decay look manageable. That jousting accident in 1536 didn't just give Henry a festering leg wound. It scrambled his brain so thoroughly that courtiers began whispering about demonic possession. The king, who had once been known for his wit and learning, transformed into a paranoid monster who saw treason in every shadow. Modern neurologists believe Henry suffered a severe traumatic brain injury when he was thrown from his horse and lay unconscious for 2 hours. In Tudor times, being unconscious for that long meant you were basically dead, but Henry somehow survived, and what crawled back from death's door wasn't entirely human anymore. The personality changes were immediate and terrifying. Henry began experiencing violent rage episodes that could last for hours, during which he would threaten to execute everyone in sight. He developed an obsession with his own mortality, constantly checking his pulse and demanding that physicians examine him multiple times daily for signs of illness or poisoning. Palace records from 1537 onward describe a man who would laugh maniacally at executions, then weep uncontrollably when told his dinner was cold. He started having conversations with people who weren't there and would sometimes spend entire days convinced that long-dead relatives were visiting him. Talk about the ultimate family reunion nobody wanted to attend. His courtiers learned to read the warning signs. When Henry's left eye began twitching, everyone within earshot had about 30 seconds to find somewhere else to be before the king erupted into homicidal fury. Servants literally drew straws to determine who would have to approach him during these episodes. The man who claimed divine right to rule England couldn't remember conversations from 1 hour to the next, but he could still order executions with perfect clarity. Henry's paranoia transformed the English court into a surveillance state that would make modern dictators jealous. By 1540, the king trusted absolutely no one. Not his wives, his children, his closest advisors, or even his own reflection. Every conversation was potentially treasonous, every glance might be plotting, and every smile could be hiding assassination plans. The palace became a maze of hidden passages and secret chambers where Henry could spy on his own courtiers. He had listening devices installed in walls, primitive but effective tubes that carried sound from private rooms directly to his chambers. Nobles learned to conduct sensitive conversations in gardens, assuming even the trees might have ears. Henry created an elaborate network of informants whose sole job was watching other informants. Thomas Cromwell, his chief minister, maintained detailed files on every person who entered the royal presence, including their facial expressions, conversation topics, and bathroom habits. Yes, bathroom habits. Henry was convinced that bowel movements could reveal treasonous thoughts. The king's sleeping arrangements became increasingly bizarre. He kept loaded crossbows beside his bed, daggers under his pillow, and armed guards stationed inside his bedroom, watching him sleep. But that wasn't enough. He also had the guards watched by other guards, creating an endless chain of surveillance that nobody fully understood. Apparently, trust issues were already trending centuries before social media made them cool. Food preparation became a military operation. Every meal required multiple tasters, sealed cooking areas, and armed supervision. The salt had to be tested, the spices analyzed, and even the plates examined for hidden poisons. A simple royal breakfast could take 4 hours to prepare and verify as non-lethal. Henry's paranoia reached such ridiculous heights that he started executing people for crimes they might commit in the future. Court records show dozens of cases where individuals were beheaded because someone dreamed they looked treasonous, or because a fortune teller suggested they might cause trouble someday. But even death couldn't contain the chaos this rotting king had unleashed. Henry VIII was such a disaster that even his own death became a public health crisis. By January 1547, the king had swollen to such grotesque proportions that his servants needed mechanical pulleys just to move him from room to room, leaving trails of rotting flesh that palace dogs would later lick from the floors. His final weeks were a horror show that traumatized everyone involved. Henry's body had become so infected that pieces of decomposing flesh would literally fall off as his servants transported him. The smell was so overwhelming that even experienced court physicians, men who regularly dealt with plague victims and battlefield wounds, had to leave his presence to vomit. When Henry finally died on January 28th, nobody wanted to get close enough to officially confirm it. His body had swollen with internal gases to the point where his skin looked ready to burst, and the stench was detectable from the palace courtyard. They wrapped his corpse in lead sheets and sealed it inside multiple reinforced coffins, confident that royal engineering could contain royal decay. They were spectacularly wrong. During the funeral procession from London to Windsor Castle, Henry's coffin literally exploded. The gases from his decomposing body built up so much pressure that the lead lining burst open, spraying rotting royal remains all over the inside of the funeral hearse. The procession had to stop while servants cleaned up chunks of their former king with buckets and rags. Even in death, Henry managed to make everyone else's job absolutely miserable. Contemporary accounts describe dogs following the funeral cortege, attracted by the smell of decomposing monarchy that had leaked onto the road. The man who claimed to rule by divine right ended up as street food for stray animals. Even burial became a logistical nightmare. Henry's grave had to be dug extra wide and deep to accommodate the massive, reinforced coffin, but the soil kept collapsing under the weight. It took multiple attempts just to get the king's remains underground and keep them there. For years afterward, visitors to St. George's Chapel reported strange noises and terrible smells emanating from Henry's tomb, probably just more gases escaping from his continuously decomposing corpse, but locals preferred to blame it on his restless ghost. Henry VIII became a walking advertisement for why absolute power and medieval medicine don't mix. This wasn't just a king who made bad decisions. This was a man whose own body staged a successful rebellion against his reign, turning England's most powerful ruler into a prisoner of his own decay. Modern medicine might have saved Henry's leg, treated his brain injury, and prevented his spectacular post-mortem explosion. But somehow, knowing that a few antibiotics could have changed the course of English history makes the whole story even more absurd. The king who split from Rome, executed 2 wives, and terrorized a kingdom for decades was ultimately defeated by bacteria he couldn't even see. Henry's legacy isn't just the Church of England or the Tudor dynasty. It's proof that even kings can't escape the consequences of their own rotting choices. Today's billionaires spend millions on life extension, while Henry spent fortunes on treatments that were literally poisoning him. At least our modern tyrants die quietly instead of exploding at their own funerals.